Well, hello everyone, and welcome to another True You podcast with me, Paula Burns, wedding planner and creative business mentor. So, this is a place where we have open discussions to understand who we are in order that we can live our lives to the fullest. So, I'm here again with another special guest. And if this is the first time you're listening to the podcast, I'm all about talking to people who consider themselves to be living their true lives and being their true selves. And usually these are people in heartfelt businesses or people who might be working in 9 to 5s, but they absolutely love what they're doing. And it doesn't mean that their life is perfect either. It just means that they are in alignment with what they feel that they should be doing. So I have got a guest with me today who I have known for a very, very long time. And I'm sure she's going to hopefully remind me how long we've known each other. But probably from the time that I started my business, which was 18 years ago, I started my business. I can't actually believe it. But we met quite soon after that. So we've known each other for quite some time. And I love what this lady does. And I can't wait for her to share her truth with you. So let's get right into it. Welcome, Angela Durant.
Oh, Paula, I think it's got to be 2009, I think we met. Because I started my first business in 2008.
So yeah.
And you just had, you were just like, you were the go-getter back then as well.
Oh.
But you don't look as if you've aged. That's the thing. You don't look at all as if you've aged. The rest of us are like, we're virtually down to liposuction.
Angela, you haven't changed at all. So don't even start. Don't even start. It is fabulous to have you here. And, I'm just looking forward to our conversation because I know that we'll go in different directions. But I know that there's a lot that you can inspire my listeners with. So let's just kick off by asking you, what is it that you do?
That's always the $1,000,000 question, isn't it? It's the hardest thing for most people coming into business or even involving in business to describe, because the true us is never one thing, isn't it? So to conceptualize it is probably the hardest thing. But where I am right now is I run a mentoring group for new to business coaches within their first 3 years called the V.I.S.I.B.L.E Club. That started in the pandemic when my corporate training vocal presentation business literally went on the table. And I think it's great, isn't it, sometimes to actually start it with, I had to start again pretty recently, as many people do, because I think it's nice to knock off the shiny exterior of the uber successful business owner, as it were. It's great when we catch people at different stages in their business, but there's very much a big business transition for me. And there's one that I'm still involved in, which has come back on the table, all that corporate training. But for 2 years, it went completely off the table when corporate training was not happening. Nice to know that it's back on the table again, and I've been involved in that. But now I actually have 2 businesses that I'm running instead of just the one.
Any of us just doing one thing. I don't think that's possible. You have to have all these different plates. We're all trying to spin so many plates.
It's I think you could. I have a strap line that kind of has gone through everything, because my background, as you well know when we met, was I ran a vocal coaching studio. I'm a specialist voice coach. I was a performer for 20 years. And I ran a voice coaching practice for about 12, 13 years when I started in 2008. And moving into corporate training and presentation skills was having the light bulb moment that my skills were really valuable in another market. And I could actually get paid in a day as much as I was training singers for a month. And so I made that decision, and we'll probably talk about these things as we go along, but there's identity shifts in this true you all of the time. And another identity shift has come out in this direction, which is around, as you say, about multi-passionate, building your business, but with a more scalable version of it. Because for me, I wanted to play a new game. the new game was I was a specialist. And I think that's the first place that people have to start at, because if you're not a specialist as a solopreneur in something, or you aim for that specialist mastery in an area, it's going to be really hard to stand out from the crowd. But there comes a point where you want to have your time back, or we'll discuss, you know, as you well know, my husband's got terminal cancer. And so that was a very big guiding decision into changing business models as a solopreneur and making sure the eggs were not all in one basket. And that's a new game to play, and that's a new evolution. Right the way through it, there is a true me when I look back at it that has kind of evolved all the way through it. And I think you could encapsulate it with, I help people to discover their voice. But we've got to, I think saying it now at the end of all of that little spiel is more relevant, because we assume it's physical voice. But I spent yesterday literally putting a whole new business model and message together for somebody that had been struggling with their audience, because that ability to understand an audience and to connect people to it started when I was a performer. It's just that this is another version of it in business.
Yes, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because over the years, we find different pieces of ourselves. I think there's the core of who we are as individuals is always there, but then we realize how we can use that in different ways. And then you get drawn to a certain aspect of that. You know, like a lot of people who knew me from the early days, obviously I started out, you know, in events and weddings and, you know, sort of grew my business around that. But creativity has always been the core of who I am. And I've had the corporate experience. I was in corporate for over 20 years. And, you know, I did all of that, you know, type of business type world, but obviously then started my business, and I wanted to keep the creativity side of things. And then I realized just how much I could offer in terms of the mentoring because of my creative brain. Because, you know, predominantly what I specialize in is helping people to stand out in a different type of way. How can they stand out differently? You mentioned about, you know, how are they going to differentiate themselves, you know, with what you do. And yes, you mentioned that specializing, and is what are you really good at? You know, understanding what you're really good at, and are you using those skills in whatever it is?
Yeah, it's just not easy at the start for people. I think that's the key, is it's just not easy at the start. You and I are looking back after being in business 15 years. And I can see the patterns. It's like Steve Jobs says, isn't it? You can only kind of join the dots when you're looking backwards, not forwards.
I love that.
So I think the most important thing is to keep progressing forward and keep evolving and get things rolling, because I spoke to somebody the other day on the phone, you know, about joining our mentorship, and you know, literally it's like, you don't get it, you don't get everybody every time, do you? And I felt really frustrated. You know, people feel frustrated on the phone in a sales conversation, you bet. I felt frustrated because I could see the innocence of the story that sits behind it, which is I want to make sure that everything is perfect. I know it matters how I show up. There's a kind of true and a not true side to it, isn't it? It's kind of like first impressions count. I need to make a big splash. I need to stand out. So I need to have it all perfect. And actually, that's absolutely impossible when it's your first rodeo. Or you're transitioning to something new. It's absolutely impossible. You literally have to fail forward and just be prepared to kind of have version 1 is better than version none, and let yourself learn, because I think you start to realize you can sift and sort what is right for you. But if you won't put your toe in the water, you actually can't work it out. I just kind of want to get my feet wet and then just get it all wrong and then put it all right, you know.
But I also it's also understanding to be able to keep it going back to this whole true you is making sure you don't lose yourself in all of that. So, you know, again, so many people are trying to fit this mold that they think they have to be, but they forget what are the key elements about them to make sure that that is running through it all, and to be themselves. Because, you know, sometimes being yourself does not, well, actually, I would say never does it fit into these molds sometimes that we are being told we have to fit into. And when you start relaxing and think about being yourself, that's when you draw the right people to you. And I've seen that over and over and over again. You know, people get so worked up about this thing. Oh, you know, I need to get visible. I need to do this. I need to do, and I really don't want to do it. I feel really uncomfortable. And then I start to strip that back with them and say, well, you know, what do you feel comfortable with? You know, what are you really passionate about? Are you focusing on that? Or are you focusing too much on the fact that I need to look like this and I need to do it like this and all of that?
Well, I've had a recent run-in with this whole interesting thing about visibility, because it wasn't really till about 2019 that I actually had to own the fact that I was inherently introverted as a person, even though I'd spent a life on the stage. Like, you could put me on the stage, you could put me in front of people. That's a learned skill that I've had all the way through my life. But I really hadn't seen that the way that I process things, or the way that I am, there's the kind of ambivert in there to some degree. I've got learned extrovertism at times, as it were, but I don't get my energy from, like, you know, put me in a crowd of people and suddenly I just feel as if I come alive. Like, put me in a crowd of people and I can come alive, but I will need to go and lie down in a darkened room afterwards.
I'm exactly the same.
You know,
that's where my creativity comes from, is that quiet place.
It's the quiet place. So I think once that was quite a big move, and it wasn't about because I've never been one for labels, and I've always wanted to kind of butt trends, but it was actually kind of owning maybe the way for the first part of the true you. For me, the evolution of it was, first of all, to actually own my discontent, and that was in 2017-18, was owning a level of discontent. I'd run my business for 10 years, so maybe somebody's worked in a corporate, or they're in a job or whatever, and they're thinking of moving, or they have, or whatever, but I had been in that business for 10 years, and I had grown so much in my skills as a voice coach. You know, I'd worked with nearly 1,000 people. People had got sort of you know, careers, and they'd gone off to college, and there was, you know, all sorts of different things happening. But I felt that I was feeling constricted, and I had probably stayed in that space for about 5 years too long. And the reason I stayed in that space 5 years too long was, as you know, we had severe family things going on. And I think if anybody's listening that thinks, well, it's all right for them, I've got this going on. Well, absolutely not. You know, I was the main breadwinner by that point, because my husband had kidney cancer, nearly stage 4 kidney cancer, in 2012, when my daughter was only 5 and I was 2.5 years into my business. And I just knew, I thought, I'm either going to have to stay under the radar and never have a business, or I'm going to have to find it in myself, you know, the true you evolving, as it were, to run this. And by the time I actually got really discontented, like, the true me was coming out. It was going, you're meant for more than this now. And I didn't ever see myself.
I love the fact that you mentioned that word, because you will feel that uncomfortableness. It was that first, I kind of, when I think about that authenticity, because it's a word that's just bandied around all the time. And I think when you really sit back, what the heck actually is authenticity? You know, I think it's an evolution of who we are. And again, like, you start to feel more into yourself, you know, as you go through it. So the first, if I think of key turning points that discovered that, the first one was having the courage to even start and go in the journey of, I think it's vocal coaching. I've wanted to make a business. Let's just go in this direction. And it was very much a lifestyle business. Thank goodness I actually did, because I was able to run and grow that business for 10 years while my husband went through 3 cancers and my mum died. And at one point, they were both in hospital at the same time in opposite ends of the country. And I don't think I've ever known such stress at the time. But that discontent was coming for a different reason. It was coming because there was an expansion. I kind of call it, you're ready to repot yourself like a plant, and the roots are starting to get really constricted, and you're feeling uncomfortable and a bit snappy, and you can attribute it to everything from menopause to God knows whatever else. But for me, at that point, there needed a new evolution. And I do think life kind of hands us those gifts ready to kind of, you know, that sort of ladder there ready to step onto. So for me, it was around working with senior leaders and corporates. And I sat in the car when I literally went from zero to hero, you know, it wasn't really, I'd been
around the business community from about 2013, 14. I was seeing what the business community wanted, and opportunities came, but the bigger one came about sort of 3 or 4 years later, when I was kind of running these two ventures, like the beginnings of another one and the vocal coaching business. And I suddenly found myself teaching 27 senior leaders in the Ministry of Defence on personal impact. And you know, there was that kind of thing, well, how did you get there? I'm like, well, it's an evolution, it's a journey. It wasn't like I stick a proposal in the post and just went, here's it. Like, it's just so ridiculous. It's all this transition.
Overnight. Yeah, exactly.
It doesn't. There's no, you know, there's just no overnight any of this stuff. Like, just don't take the blue pill. It doesn't exist, right? There's no overnight.
Absolutely.
But I sat in the car, honestly, I remember sitting in the car, and this was the first true me identity shift, which was, I'd only ever thought that I would be in music. You know, I was a musician at heart, and I just couldn't ever see myself as transitioning past that. And I sat in the car, and I knew for loads of different reasons that I needed to make a decision of shifting, because I could get way more money for my time and my skill at that level. It wasn't that one was more right or more wrong than another one. I could make a business model out of working with hobby singers. I could make a business out of working with senior leaders. But there was a difference in terms of my energy, my time, my value in the marketplace. And that was the first true you, and it was quite a big step up, because you have to see yourself in a new space, in a new value, in a new identity.
See yourself, but also accept yourself as that person as well, because you know, it's scary, because you start to think, well, actually, will I really fit that, you know, and do I just stay what I'm doing now? Angela, I want to ask you, I want to take you back a bit and ask you about your childhood. Because you know, we're talking about the true you now, and it's all sort of rooted in the whole vocal coach and the being on stage and all of that. And you know, I always love to talk about the childhood, because that sort of sets us up, I think, for what we do in life, whether what of experiences we have. It might not be directly the thing, but there's always that little bit of spark that ignites something when we were young. And so I'd love to ask you, what was your childhood like, and what was that sort of transition in then going, you know, as you were getting older and to move into what you do now?
In one respect, it was a kind of normal childhood, but it wasn't a normal childhood at all. My uncle was a very famous entertainer and 1930s, 40s UK film star. His name was George Formby, and you can go up on YouTube and you can find films and all sorts of manner of stuff. And he was my dad's brother.
Yeah.
And my dad, it was his second marriage. My dad was 20 years older than my mum, so there was quite an age gap, and I was kind of like the last of these sort of children to be born. I grew up very much in the shadow. I can only imagine what, you know, I know it sounds like, not that I'm comparing myself with the Beckham kids or, you know, or quite Kim Kardashian, but in the early 70s, in the 60s and 70s, they were that famous.
Yeah.
They were that famous. And I grew up in the shadow of what was, you know, George Formby had only just died. My father was on the stage taking the act around. I would be bundled in the back of a car with a blanket, and we'd be driving up and around the country at the side of stages. Right. So some of my earliest memories of being 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 years old, you know, all those formative years, were standing at the side of stages watching some of the top UK comedians of the day entertain an audience. And this is really interesting about, you say, where is the true you? Because it wasn't until a client of mine a couple of years ago, when I asked him, I said, you know, out of everybody that you could have, it's like a question I ask people, why did you pick me? I love to know people's buying decisions. And I'd said, you know, to get over your fear of public speaking or to do what you're doing, you could have chosen NLP, you could have chosen a load of different routes. Why did you choose me? And he said, because you've been in front of audiences all of your life. And it suddenly clicked. And I went back in my mind to those childhood moments where I stood on the side of stages and I watched this banter go on between a comedians and the audience. And literally they would come on and they had less than 20 seconds to get that audience on their side. Nothing's any different now on social media. It's just a different format, but the stagecraft and the love and the way that they worked with an audience in that moment, I think it comes into you like osmosis. It's just, it took me several years to work out what had imprinted itself into me from that time. So I was just used to, I think that's on the very plus side. On the minus side, the pressure to perform, the pressure to measure up was, in my child brain, I very much suffered with my confidence when I got into my teenage years, even though I had done stage things. I had been, recorded an album of musical songs at 13 and took it around the country with a group. It looked on the surface as if I had all the confidence in the world, but what was truly happening is I lost my father when I was 13 years old, and it felt like everything shifted in myself and my confidence from that point on. I felt different than other people, and I felt huge pressure that I'd got this family background, and there was this pressure to measure up, and it really took me, oh my God, it took me right the way through. It took me right the way through. I think I don't really think I started to, I think I'm still working through it now. There's like layers of an onion. There are things that I let go of even now that I just don't realize are still hanging on. Like you get a feeling, even in business, you have a sales conversation or you speak to somebody and you find yourself acting like you have to prove yourself. And it's like, how old is this chestnut?
Yes, I know. I know. I totally.
So it's such a mixed bag, isn't it? It's like a yin and a yang. There's things that now that I'm doing that are an absolute throwback to me watching top people and just kind of seeing as a child, oh, this is the way it's done. Like I can't remember ever learning it, learning being in front of an audience. I can't remember not appreciating how to connect with an audience. And then on the backside of that, there's that lack of confidence that comes when you think, well, now I have to really prove myself because of the family that I had. And I think one of the biggest, I suppose, I always say, like, your message, right? Half of the word message is the word mess. So, basically your whole life is your message. And I think when I started vocal coaching, the one thing that I wanted to do with people that had never been done for me, which was actually discover, like, the artist within. Who are you meant to be? Not who have you been brought up to be? Who has society told you you should be? Who do you feel as if you should measure up to? But what are the gifts? What are the desires? What are the talents on the inside of you? What is the metaphorical or even physical voice that you have? And how do we bring that out? Because you won't be happy until you find it.
And it's such a big question. You ask that question and the majority of people can't answer it. They have to spend time to really search within, and they have to dig deep. Because, my services, I do this whole helping business owners, the small business owners to step into that sort of authentic spotlight. But the first thing, and also that, obviously what I specialize in is how can we, get you to stand out differently, and what emotions can we use and things. But I always get them to start with, who are you? And exactly what you said, who are you? What do you love? That's a big question. What do you love? And they forget, what is it that they love? What do they love about themselves? What do they love to do? We, as a nation, we've forgotten who we are as individuals, but it's more like, oh, well, everybody else is doing this, so let's go and do it, because we're all falling into this whole, there's so much noise out there that we're all falling into this space of, oh, let's just all mix and do the things and whatever, that we forget who we are. And that's a really big part of it. Like you said, who are we intrinsically?
Well, I think even on the women question, I don't think that's gone away. No. I don't think the gender question has gone away. You can call it what you like. I don't think the gender question has gone away at all, because for women, I think even online now, there is a new female shaming problem going on, which is if you're suddenly not a 6 or a 7 figure business owner, or you're not having your lifestyle pics out, then, that we've got this new kind of, there's a kind of new kind of coach shaming thing going on, and I thought the coaching industry was becoming almost like a multi-level marketing thing going, quite a few years ago. And I think, I don't think the woman question's gone away, because for me, identity and even asking that you become a mum, or you try and find out who you are in business, or I've become a full, virtually a full-time carer at the same time. My husband is like terminal, but not completely imminent. And we walk a really fine tightrope all of the time. And I remember this kind of, it's only now that I'm actually starting to talk about it more. One, I wanted to respect him, the fact that, he's still living and we're still living through it. And I know that sometimes people put an awful lot of what I call oversharing on social media in order to try and get clients. And I find that quite icky, to be personally honest, really. So I struggled with even what to say to feel authentic. Which parts do I keep hidden? Which parts do I share? What the heck is authenticity in terms of your message online? What do you actually share about yourself? Now I've started to say it a little more, partly because I want to make it all right for people that are dealing with health conditions, that are dealing with overcoming things, that are dealing with challenging family situations, that you don't, and particularly the women, that you don't suddenly have to just work backwards. You don't have to suddenly just stop your business and keep having to retract everything all of the time. Because I actually, I do feel as if the men that I'm around, and it might be a sweeping overly generalization if there's any listening in, but I do feel as if, they're not the ones to carry the can of the caring most of the time. They're not the ones in the sandwich generation dealing with the older parents and the kids and trying to get your business up when it feels completely buried under lack of boundaries, family needs, your own sort of imposter syndrome half the time, and trying to pull the real you out of all of that and find your identity. You're absolutely right. It does. And it takes, I tell you what it takes being in a space or being with a coach or a space or a community long enough for those edges to start to rub off you. What we are faced with, though, is if you haven't done 6 figures in a nanosecond, if you haven't and this sanitized version of the real journey, don't get me started on that one, Paula, and suddenly I did it, and the next minute I went to 100k, and I'm like, there's no next minute you went to 100k, so it's just horrible.
And
I'll stop now.
Life, I know, and a great life, I know we've got to get on a soapbox here, but a great life doesn't mean you need to be on 100k.
No.
Everybody's great life means something different. You again asking that question, what do you want? What do you want as an individual? Because at the end of the day, this whole 100k thing and blah blah blah, that means you need to have a team, you need to have this, you need to have that. That's not shared, so is that what you want? It's not just about the money, it's about the lifestyle of how you're going to keep that running, how are you going to make that happen. And so
and that's such a journey, Paula, isn't it? It's such a flipping journey.
It really is, and I've come to the place in my life where I know what I want. I want the simple things in life. I want to be around people that I love, my family and my friends, and I want to be able to have experiences and to be places and to be able to possibly be working from a beach or something like that. But that for me, I have no interest in running like a big consortium or a big organization. I love the whole personal touch that I have with my clients. I love the one-on-one, and I know I've spoken to some people who say, oh, well, I prefer to do like the group things because you get more money with these group things. And the group things are great. And I have a group, but it's also got a very personal touch to it. So, but I also like the one-on-ones, because I feel like I remember when I started, in business, and it meant so much to me to have one-on-one time with somebody who could ask me specific questions and they could relate to what I was talking about. And, I want to provide that sort of environment for, small business owners, so they can get that as well, that I know that they need, and I'm hearing it all the time. People sometimes are reluctant to say I want that space or that time, because it's like, how much is it going to be? And of course we've got to value ourselves, that we I have different levels of how people can work with me. But even if they are in a group program with me, I'm keeping the numbers to a certain level so that we can still connect in a real way. So it's true. There's just so much stuff out there that just sort of tells you do this, do that, and this is how easy it is. And like you said, it is not easy. You don't just wake up and you're going to get huge pots of money. And money seems to be the thing that everybody, okay, yes, if you're in business, it is about making money. But everybody's sort of measuring this thing around, oh, I'm going to make loads of money. And when I ask people, what is your challenge right now? Oh, I need to make more sales. But let's just strip it back a bit. What is your challenge?
Well, and I think it's really back in 2015. I kind of got a week of flu, and sometimes you do your greatest reflections when you actually physically can't get out of bed. Carry on doing it. And I was kind of lying there, and this thought floated across my mind, which was, Angela, you need to fast the voices. And I knew what that meant, but I didn't kind of know all that meant. But what I really have discovered over the years is what that really means for each of us is you have to do this work on the true you, because otherwise you can't focus, you can't discern what and who to listen to. I was speaking to a lady the other day. We just did a kind of Master Your Message event, and I was speaking to somebody, and I literally had my head in my hands, because I could help her, we could help her, but she didn't even have the money to help her, because what she had done is she'd slid innocently, and this is what happens at times, is slid, what I call it's like the marketing is so psychologically slick that she slid into a completely inappropriate business program for her at the level that she's at. And I'm saying at the level that she's at, and I think it's not, everything can work in the right way at the level that you're at, but majority of times it's saying, don't worry if you're a startup, don't worry if you don't have an audience, don't worry if you don't have this. And suddenly they've sunk money that they don't have into trying to be at level 7 on the ladder. And I'm like, we need to deal with level 1 to 5 first, love, but that's not, and that's what you represent, and that's what I represent. It's quite interesting, because I love the fact that you're helping people with visibility, and I've got something called the V.I.S.I.B.L.E Club, so surely we would be in competition. I'm like, it's so not the case, because the different levels of what that needs and who is right for different people is so vast, as it were. I think there has to be there is a place for people at the beginning journey, and actually it's where I started. I was really good at getting things off the ground and making money, and just kind of taking a new idea and going, who's the audience for this, what's going to sell, and get it started. The game that I'm playing now, the new true me, as it were, is about what else is possible for me. What else is possible for me, even within the circumstances that I'm in? Who else is this person? Because I kind of used to see myself like a big tree, and this was the interesting part of me, kind of represented by a big oak tree or something, is every time I was going to have to grow, the roots are going to have to go deeper. They needed to go deeper into love. They needed to kind of shift, and they needed to be more solid. My grounding needed to be solid. There was no big branches in the marketplace unless I was more solid in areas, So this is the way nature works. I say all the time, you don't go from seed to tree. It doesn't happen in nature. It won't happen in life. But if you're working on the roots, if you're working on deepening and solidifying your grounding, then you can't fail to grow.
I love you. This is the big thing for me. Anything I work on, and I always say, you have to start with the foundations. Because if you look at anything that's being, a great example is when a house is being built. Right. And you will see, like housing, if they start a new sort of development or whatever, it seems like forever, all you see is ground and dirt, and you can't see anything. And they seem to be working on this project for absolutely forever. And you think, well, where are these houses? Where is this whole development? All I can see is just dirt and maybe a few pipes and nothing at all. But that is because the foundations are the strongest part of those buildings. And if you don't spend all that time making that strong, when you build all these beautiful, wonderful houses, they're all going to disappear. They're all
You do realise that's what I was doing before I started my business in 2008. I used to sell houses for new homes developers for about 6 years. Loved
Yeah.
it. Well, this is the interesting part of this,
Yeah.
right? Because the foundations are already 1/3 deep than the actual building. So if you've just got an ordinary 2 up, 2 down, half of that underground is foundations.
There you go.
And so imagine, like, the tall buildings, how deep the foundations go in the actual earth before that actually stands up strong, because otherwise there is nothing. It'll topple over at the slightest problem. It's got no roots to it. And I think that's it, is it's got no roots. And I remember sitting on the building sites in those porter cabins, when people used to come around on the weekend and just have a look at the show houses. And I used to watch it. And interesting, even before the foundations, and this is, I think, part of what people don't know how to do the work for, is the groundworks have to go on, and the quality of ground that you're even building the foundation in on and on. Funny you asked about the childhood things, because if the foundation, if the actual ground that the foundations are going in is already marshy, full of stones, needs work on it, needs cultivating and rotating first.
Yeah.
If we can't even do the ground, we've got to do some groundworks, because as soon as those groundworks are done, which is absolutely, it's like on identity, on what type of business are you really trying to build here, what's important for your family, what's important for your future. Take away the noise, take completely away the noise of what you think you should build in order to make yourself look like a success for everybody else around you, and actually start to think about what is important for you and your family, and the thing that you want to build next. That is the cultivation stuff. And you'll suddenly find all of those triggers and all those resistances. That's the place. There's got to be some work done because as you then put in those business foundations in, for instance, I started, this project called the V.I.S.I.B.L.E Club, because I'm going, how hard is it going to be to build a scalable business? She said. And this was the response to somebody to me. So, Angela, for goodness sake, don't build a community, because you're not community oriented. You're a fast project girl. You get in there, sort somebody out, and and move on. Don't build a community. You won't be able to cope with it. Well, the interesting thing about it, it's actually been the healing of me, because as somebody said to me once, fierce independence is a trauma response. And my fierce independence of not allowing help, of not, wanting to show my true side to myself, not wanting to show there was any weakness, not wanting to say what was going on in my life, as it were, because I didn't want people to think bad of me. I didn't want people to think I couldn't do my job. I felt my reputation was on the line. And what it did was I was so isolated in that business growth, because I was so unwilling. I didn't know which part of me I was to show up with. And actually, through community and through relaxing that and learning to be with other people, and to share the journey, and to share the wins and the woes, as it were, with those people, and not always have to look as if you've got your act together. It's the healing of us. I think the entrepreneurial journey it's the biggest healing and personal development journey you can ever go on, if you can stomach actually just not giving up and getting through to the other end of it.
Yeah, and that's true. If you can stomach it, you've got to, it's not easy, but you've got to stomach it. Angela, honestly, I love in our conversation, because it's just naturally flowing, and I think we're just so passionate about what we're talking about, this whole thing, being your true self and laying those foundations. I love the fact that we've had such a deep conversation about foundations, because that means so much to me. I'm gonna just ask you some quick fire questions. I need to get the words out. I'm getting so excited now, I can't even get the words out, right? So I'm gonna ask you some quick fire questions. Okay, so do you understand what makes you truly happy?
That's a work in progress right now, because I could have said yes before the worst of our cancer journey, because sometimes what we're facing is not what you'd actually want, but what you have to accept. And what would truly make me happy would be to not have a cancer journey with my husband. But what makes me truly happy is understanding that you don't get to go through life without getting a good soaking in the rain. And what makes me truly happy is, I think, handling it with grace and handling everything with grace, because I think I'm starting to realize more and more that what makes me truly happy is to realize I've caused no more harm to anybody else in the process of living.
Right. Okay, that's interesting.
Okay. And the reason I say that is, just think of something really quick, like you're late for work, you go cut somebody off in traffic. You go take, everybody has to get one better than everybody else in life right now. There's a different kind of pandemic going on where we're keeping up with the Joneses, and getting one-upmanship is just become an epidemic. And I'm kind of like, what truly makes me happy now is realizing that actually I'm on my own path, end of.
Yes. Yeah, I like that. I like that. How are you with getting still to feel emotion? So being still to just like feel.
Well, I've struggled with that through the situations that we've gone through. I've struggled with that because emotion for me felt incredibly painful. I've lost my husband nearly twice in the last, 3 years alone. They called us into hospital and said, say goodbye, he's got 2 days to live in 2021. And I knew that if I'd have lost him then, it would have been hard. But as he came out, I've got to do this all over again. So there's a different level of emotion to knowing that you've already had a dress rehearsal to that one. Thank you. Yeah. I think for me, the emotion part is, I'm still working on that one, Paula, and I booked myself in for therapy. I've got a big team around me supporting me in a way that I would never have allowed in my life before. I wouldn't have allowed that vulnerability. And I think I'm suddenly realizing that it is what makes us strong, to actually put those people and that stuff around us. I wouldn't run the business without it. I wouldn't be where I am. And that might seem a really odd thing to say, because it's not something that I kind of go around and share. But emotionally, I think I am learning I'm a journaler, and it's one of the places for me where I can allow emotion to come out through the page. And walking the dog, being in nature, being on my own to recharge, and allowing myself a good cry. I mean, at one point, I wouldn't even allow myself a good cry on my own. I'd have to go shut myself in the toilet.
Just to have a cry.
The release. It's like, all I'm saying is that you have to have a release. And somebody introduced me the other day to something called the Sedona method. And it's so simple. It's been sort of like validated by Harvard for its simplicity. And often when things are too simple, we want to just make it more complicated. And it's a case of, could I allow this emotion? Is the first question. Can I allow this emotion to be here? Then the next question is, am I willing to let go of this emotion? Let it through me and out.
Yes.
Yeah. And the third one is, when am I willing to do that? And that started to help me, because a bit like holding onto a pen and trying to push it away from you, you're still holding on to the unpleasantness of things if you're trying to control it. And the only way for me personally, to process emotion is to find that space where there is a release of it, a safe release of it. It's not venting on social media and calling it a post. It's not putting something in there and looking for more validation. It keeps you stuck in it. It's finding professional and help, real help, that you in your way, that makes sense to you, whether it's a walk with the dog, whether it's somebody to talk to over coffee, whether it's a coach.
What is it that works for you?
What is it works for you? But I've had so much emotion under this journey, and I think I'm starting to share with people what I've gone through, because I truly kept that very hidden, because I didn't want people to think that I couldn't handle it. Because people would say how resilient I was.
Yeah, we always want to sort of like put our best face on.
Put our best face on. Yeah. So if what I'm saying helps somebody to realize you can still work towards a true you successful life right in the middle of utter pain and chaos, then it's, you know, it's worth me getting uncomfortable to share it.
And it's like I said, you know, true you doesn't mean everything's perfect. True you is just being more mindful, more present about it, and just being more connected to who you are as an individual. You've touched on this where you've talked about this already, but my next question is going to be, have you found your tribe? And it sounds like you found your tribe.
Finding. Now, there's two tribes I found, okay? Yeah. Finding and two tribes. And that's actually been a work in progress, really, because I in 2018, I walked away from a tribe that I'd belonged to for about 15 years, that I'd started to feel less connected to. And that's not easy when you're around groups of people that you suddenly are feeling like, I don't connect with you anymore, and walking away. And that was not kind of deemed good. But coming out of it and allowing yourself some space, you actually start to gravitate to a new version of yourself, a new way forward. And so obviously the tribe that I'm building in the V.I.S.I.B.L.E Club, I've started to really care for their lives and who they are. You know, you start to care for my clients. I look at them, I feel connected to them. I don't want them to be a transactional thing. They're part of who we are. They're part of who we are. You know, I feel connected to them. I've got a share in their success and their mine. But also I decided to join a couple of mastermind groups, and one is, I'm not joking, it triggers me all the time. I could literally just turn off the Zoom and walk away, and I've deliberately put myself in that space because they are a very open, sharing, authentic group. And it's the one thing that I find most challenging to do, is actually share my journey with other people. I want to put the mask on. I want to go, the show must go on. I want everybody to say to me, God, Angela, aren't you amazing coping with this? And I can kind of have my martyr moment. And I just realize like how that's not where my strength lies. Our strength lies in togetherness and honesty. And a bit like Brené Brown says, you know, some people, there's things that I can say here and there's things that I probably wouldn't say here, because only certain people deserve your shame story. And if they haven't earned the right to hear it, then they haven't earned the right to hear it and be in it within you with that. So I think you'll have layers of those tribes of people for you. And I think that's the key.
And as you say, it's an ongoing process as well. So, you know, but I've got a final question for you, Angela.
Go for it.
Final question. Do you love yourself unconditionally?
No, not yet. Okay. And I think that's the truthful answer. But
and I love you for saying that.
No, not at all. Because I think people go, oh, yes, I do. And I'm like going, oh, really, grow up. Of course you don't. You know, there's like layers of the onion. Here's what I love about myself is I love that I'm more willing than ever to say that I still struggle with that. What I hope around this is, and I will say this because it's part of who I am and I've kept this hidden for too long, it's like, I know that the one of the key aspects of loving myself unconditionally is getting deeper and deeper and deeper rooted in my faith in God, and whatever that means for other people, but for me, because perfect love casts out fear, and I am not perfect yet in love. And what I mean by perfect in love means I don't understand enough around feeling and being loved by and for myself, with my upbringing as a people pleaser and as a performer. Because when you perform to get the love and the attention and the strokes, and that is been a hard habit to break, to allow myself to have boundaries, to not have to make everybody happy at my own expense and well-being, and to actually allow myself to say no, and to have that space where that's okay for me to say no and have my own needs, particularly when you are caring for everybody else's needs around you. So I would say is do I love myself unconditionally? No, but I'm certainly on the pathway towards it better.
You're working towards it. Angela, thank you so much for your time today.
Oh, it's a pleasure. I hope it's
Our
been helpful to come
conversation,
here.
I am sure, has touched someone who's listening to this podcast, if not everyone who's listening to this podcast. And thank you for being your true self and sharing your true story, because that's what we want to hear. That's that's what this podcast is all about. If people want to find you, where can they find you?
They can
I
find me on
your
LinkedIn.
links. Yeah, but
yeah, they can find me on LinkedIn. They can find us at thevisiblecoachespodcast.com, and they can also find us at thevisibleclub.com.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And to everyone who is listening, I hope you have found something that you're going to take away and to be able to apply to your life in some shape or form. And to contact myself or Angela if anything has resonated with you in terms of being your true self. I will be back next week with another amazing guest. But in the meantime, keep being the true you. Bye, everyone.